The Galactic Council gathered in their grand chamber, the golden ceiling reflecting the cold light of distant stars. The massive hall was filled with hundreds of alien delegates, each wearing their symbols of power. The walls glowed with soft blue light as thousands of cameras streamed the event to every corner of the galaxy. It was supposed to be a historic day, a day of power, a day to remind everyone who ruled the stars, but deep beneath the polished surface, a silent storm waited to be born. Across the galaxy, entire worlds stopped to watch the broadcast, in orbit stations, colonies, trade hubs, and even ships drifting between stars. Eyes turned toward the Council's message. The giant holographic emblem of the Council floated in the center, cold and bright, and below it, the words slowly appeared in the common tongue, declaring Earth a threat to galactic peace. It was not just words, it was a sentence, a judgment, and they expected humanity to bow. On the floor of the chamber, the High Speaker of the Council, an alien with silver skin and long crystal horns, raised both arms. His voice echoed like polished stone. For too long, humanity has defied order. They have refused to kneel. They have expanded without permission. They have built fleets in the dark. They have become a danger to us all. His words were smooth but sharp. Every delegate watched with approving nods. Today, we draw the line. All Terran colonies will be seized. All trade routes will be cut. All treaties will be burned. Humanity will be broken before it breaks us. The crowd erupted in cold applause, the sound of thousands of hands and claws meeting. It was not joy, it was arrogance. They believed their decision was final. Far away, inside the Terran embassy station floating in neutral orbit, silence ruled the room. The Terran ambassador stood alone before the screen, his hands behind his back, his suit dark and simple, his face calm, but his eyes sharp like blades. Around him, aides watched the broadcast with clenched fists and tight jaws. No one spoke. No one shouted, not a single word of protest was said, because everyone in that room knew what this meant. The Council had just crossed the line. They had burned the last bridge, and they had no idea what they had just awakened. The ambassador slowly exhaled. The sound of distant static filled the air, and then he whispered just one word, send it. Somewhere deep in Terran space, beyond the borders where alien fleets never dared to go, a silent black flag transmission was launched. It traveled through encrypted wormholes, bouncing from hidden relays buried in dead systems. Its signal carried no words, just a symbol, a black flag with a single star burning in the center. It was a message older than the Council itself, a message that meant war, not the kind of war the galaxy was used to, but the kind that reshaped empires. While the Council spoke with arrogance, humanity prepared with silence, and that silence was far more dangerous than any threat. Back in the chamber, the delegates laughed among themselves, mocking the humans. They will beg for mercy, said a scaled creature with 3 eyes. They always do, replied another. They will surrender their fleets, their colonies, their pride. Their laughter echoed through the golden hall like poison. They had grown too used to power, too confident in their control. They saw humanity as a rebellious child, not as the storm it truly was. They didn't notice the Terran envoy walking slowly to the center of the chamber, his steps quiet but heavy, his dark uniform gleaming under the lights. He stood there while hundreds of alien eyes stared at him with contempt, expecting him to kneel, expecting him to speak soft words, expecting him to beg. He didn't beg, he didn't bow, he just stood straight, his voice low but clear. You have made your choice, he said, the words cutting through the air like knives. The room fell silent for a brief second. But then the aliens laughed again, dismissing him as if he were a fool. We will erase your kind, one of the delegates hissed. We are the law, another shouted. But the Terran envoy didn't react. He just stared at them with cold eyes, the kind of eyes that didn't belong to a diplomat anymore, but to a soldier who had seen too much and lost too much. Then he turned and walked away without saying another word. The silence he left behind felt heavier than any speech. On Earth, far from the Council's golden hall, entire cities were quiet. Massive screens in every capital showed the Council's announcement. Children watched with wide eyes. Soldiers clenched their fists. Old veterans nodded slowly as if they had expected this day to come. And in hidden war rooms deep underground, red lights began to glow. Officers and admirals gathered around tables filled with star maps. Their faces hard and focused. They went too far. One of them said, "Then it begins." Another replied, and with a single press of a button, ancient protocols that had slept for generations awakened. The Earth Defense Network, the Shadow Fleets, the Black Guard, all came online. Out in the cold dark of space, hidden Terran warships powered up, their black hulls absorbing every bit of light, their engines silent as shadows, their weapons humming with restrained energy. They had been built for a day just like this. A day when diplomacy died and war was the only language left. Captains stood on their bridges in silence, crews strapped in, waiting for the final order, no cheers, no speeches. Only the quiet heartbeat of a species that remembered what it meant to fight for survival. Meanwhile, alien newscasts across the galaxy celebrated. Their anchors spoke of human surrender, of easy victory. They called Earth weak, isolated, doomed. They believed humanity would crumble. They didn't know that humanity didn't crumble. It burned, and when it burned, it took everything with it. In underground bunkers, on silent stations, in the shadows of distant colonies, Terran Command whispered the same words again and again. We do not bow. Back in the council chamber, as the last vote was cast, the High Speaker raised his arms again. This is the end of human defiance, he declared proudly. The crowd cheered, but among the crowd, a single alien delegate from a minor world looked nervous. He had traded with humans, he had seen their ships up close, he had heard the stories, and deep inside, he knew this was not the end. This was the beginning of something the council would not be ready for. His hands trembled as he watched the humans leave the chamber without a word, because he had seen that kind of silence before, and it had always been followed by war. As the Terran envoy walked through the long corridors of the council's palace, the cold artificial light flickered slightly, shadows moved with his steps, guards stood aside, not daring to stop him. His communicator beeped once, a single encrypted tone, and that was enough. The black flag transmission had reached every hidden base, every sleeping fleet, every shadow soldier. The response was simple, silent, and absolute: Earth would not kneel. Above the blue planet, the great orbital defense rings began to rotate. The old Terran shipyards that had been quiet for years came alive with thunder. Hidden cannons emerged from the dark side of the moon. Massive ships slipped out of cloaked docks in the asteroid belt. The galaxy didn't hear speeches. It heard engines waking up. Humanity had always been underestimated. They didn't roar first. They prepared, they planned, they waited. And then they struck. This time, the council had given them the reason. Inside the council's golden chamber, the aliens still celebrated their victory as if it was already written in history. They didn't know that somewhere in the cold void, humanity had just written another story, one that would not end with begging or surrender, but with fire and fury. The calm before the storm had ended. The line had been crossed, and when humanity moved, the galaxy would never be the same again. The stars outside the council's palace looked peaceful that night, but in the silence between them, the storm was already rising. Alien fleets spread across human borders, moving like a wave of silver and fire, their massive ships covering the blackness of space with their arrogant light. They laughed at how quiet everything was. They saw no Terran warships, no defense lines, no activity, only empty silence drifting between stars. To them, it looked like surrender. The great council commanders leaned back in their chairs, their alien lips curling into cold smiles. They believed humanity had broken. They believed Earth had accepted its fate without a fight. In the command hub of the lead alien carrier, the admiral sipped a dark liquid from a crystal cup, his 3 eyes scanning the radar. Nothing, only silence. He turned to his officers and said with pride, "They are already on their knees." Laughter spread across the deck like poison. None of them understood what they were really seeing. They mistook silence for weakness when in truth, they were standing inside a carefully built trap. Far away from those glowing alien warships, beyond the borders where no council ship dared to wander, the Terran fleet floated like shadows, hundreds of warships hidden in the deep black, their hulls painted in dark alloys that absorbed every star's light, engines cold, systems in silent mode. They were not hiding out of fear. They were waiting. Every ship was fully armed, every captain ready, every crew trained for a day just like this. Deep inside the Terran flagship, the lights were dim. The bridge was quiet. The captain stood in front of a large holographic map showing alien fleets advancing. Slow, confident, predictable. The humans watched them with the eyes of hunters watching prey walk into the trap. One of the officers whispered, "They think we've surrendered." The captain gave a small nod and replied softly, "Good, let them." The quiet heartbeat of the Terran fleet pulsed like a predator breathing slowly before the kill. In alien broadcasts, the council spread victory speeches, Alien anchors declared the human frontier theirs. They mocked Terran silence, called Earth weak, broken, out of options. But inside the shadow fleets, the humans smiled without joy, because they knew silence was their weapon. While the Council wasted energy on speeches, humanity was loading cannons, priming torpedoes, aligning warheads, positioning stealth mines in forgotten trade lanes. While the Council believed they owned the stars, humanity was already inside their systems, mapping their movements, tracking their fleets, recording every arrogant broadcast. This wasn't a war humanity was entering. It was a war they had already prepared for years, long before the Council ever saw it coming. The alien admirals grew careless. They advanced with open formation, relaxed, confident. Their ships drifting like kings across the border. Patrols lowered their shields, carriers left their escorts behind, and the fleet scattered across human space like vultures over a corpse. But humanity wasn't a corpse. It was a storm hiding beneath a still sky. In deep space bunkers, Terran AI systems whispered to each other. Invisible satellites tracked every enemy ship. Coded signals rippled across black space, silent and fast. In hidden Terran control stations, operators sat with headphones on, listening to the emptiness like hunters listening to footsteps in the dark. One of them whispered, "Target locked." Another followed, "Tracking confirmed." The captain of the flagship gave no speech, no command for glory. He simply said, "Wait for my mark," and the darkness held its breath. Across dozens of alien fleets, the mood turned into mocking joy. Soldiers held victory parties on their decks. Officers boasted about how easy the conquest would be. Council leaders sent out bold messages declaring the Terran frontier theirs. They thought they were winning without firing a shot. But in the silence of Terran space, old war machines waited, their hulls marked with scars from forgotten battles. Their reactors glowing faintly like the eyes of sleeping giants. The humans had learned long ago that real power didn't come from shouting, it came from patience, and right now, they had patience like no other. Inside the alien command ship, the admiral leaned over the star map, chuckling at the empty human sectors. "Look at them, they've abandoned everything," he said. His officers laughed with him. None of them noticed the faint flicker in their sensors. A signal so small their systems filtered it out as noise. It wasn't noise. It was a Terran code crawling through the void. A message that reached every hidden ship at the same second. The lights inside the Terran fleet flickered red. Engines hummed. To life, weapons rotated into position like wolves baring their teeth in the dark. One by one, massive warships turned toward their targets with surgical precision. In the black void of space, hundreds of Terran ships prepared to move as one. The alien fleets were so deep inside Terran territory they no longer cared about caution. They thought they owned the field. They didn't realize the humans had let them come in on purpose, pulling them deeper like a fisherman pulling prey closer to the net. The alien admiral smiled as he raised his glass to toast their victory. But far away in the Terran flagship, the captain lowered his hand slowly, and one word echoed through the fleet: "Now." Engines roared in silence. Cannons charged. Without warning, missiles armed with ancient fury locked onto their prey. The stars themselves seemed to dim as the human war machines moved. The aliens' first hint of danger was a strange flicker on their outer radar, then another, then hundreds, and before they could even process what was happening, the blackness around them came alive with fire. Terran ships emerged from nowhere, their weapons already aimed, their formation perfect. The alien admiral jumped from his chair shouting commands. But it was too late. The trap was closed. The silence they laughed at turned into the sound of their own fear. And the galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity stopped talking and started hunting. It began with one explosion. A bright flash on the edge of the alien fleet that burned through the darkness like a newborn star. The Council commanders stared at their screens in confusion as the lead battleship vanished from every radar in less than a heartbeat. No distress signal, no warning, just silence. Then a second flash tore through another sector, and another ship was gone. The alien admiral screamed for answers, but his officers stuttered. Their scanners showed nothing but empty space. Nothing had entered, nothing had left. Their proud fleet was being torn apart by something they couldn't see. Somewhere in the blackness, Terran ships moved like ghosts, sliding through the void without sound, their engines silent. Their weapons already locked on target long before the aliens even knew they were there. Humanity didn't warn, they didn't declare war. They struck with precision like hunters breaking the bones of prey in the dark. In the control room of the Terran flagship, the captain stood tall in the dim red light. His crew moved with cold focus, No one shouted, no one celebrated. This wasn't revenge for them. This was calculation. Every alien ship that crossed the border had been mapped, tracked, analyzed, and now it was being erased. The first wave of stealth torpedoes had already hit their marks. The second wave was seconds away. Operators whispered code numbers instead of commands. The captain raised his hand. Slightly, and hundreds of Terran warships fired again in perfect silence. Their railguns lit up space like thin lines of silver fire, cutting through alien shields as if they were paper. Explosions bloomed like fiery flowers across the enemy fleet. Inside the alien flagship, alarms screamed, lights flickered. Officers stumbled as gravity shifted under the impact. The admiral barked orders, find them. Fire everything. But the targeting systems showed nothing. The Terran ships were invisible to their scanners, ghosts in the void. Every missile they launched flew into emptiness, hitting nothing but silence. Their fleet had come to conquer. But now they were the ones trapped. Their own formation, so wide and relaxed, now turned into a cage, as Terran ships struck from every direction like wolves circling a blind animal. One alien commander slammed his claws against the console. It's impossible, nothing moves this fast, he shouted. But deep down, they all knew, it wasn't that humans moved fast. It was that they had been here all along, waiting. Across the battlefield, alien soldiers screamed over broken comms, shields failing. We've lost the port engines. They're inside the perimeter. Their proud fleet that had mocked Terran silence now drowned in its own noise, explosions, burning hulls, and static-filled transmissions. The alien admiral's face twisted with disbelief. They're supposed to be on the run, he hissed. They were silent. But silence was never surrender. Silence was a blade being sharpened, and now that blade was cutting deep. Alien ships tried to regroup, but every time they formed a line, Terran strike groups slipped between their gaps and tore it apart. Aboard the Terran destroyer named Silent Rain, a young gunner watched the enemy fleet through her targeting scope, her hands steady. She whispered to her commander, they're panicking. He nodded, good, keep them that way. And another barrage of railgun fire sliced through the enemy's heart. Massive cruisers split in half like tin cans, their glowing cores bursting like suns. One alien captain screamed through the fleet channel, where are they? But there was no answer. Because by the time they saw the Terran ships, it was already too late. They were already dead. The alien flagship fired its main cannon blindly into the dark, trying to hit anything. But it struck only shadows. Terran ships used their own blast waves to slingshot around and strike from behind. Coordinated, silent, merciless. This wasn't chaos. This was war born from patience and precision. For months humanity had listened, watched, mapped every alien movement, and now every weakness was being punished. The alien admiral's hands shook as he stared at the tactical map shrinking red dot by. Red dot, they're ghosts, one officer whispered. No, the admiral replied through gritted teeth, they're humans. Panic began to spread through the alien fleet like a wildfire. Ships broke formation. Smaller vessels tried to retreat. But retreat was already cut off. Terran minefields hidden in dark corridors exploded the moment their engines flared. Escape routes turned into graveyards. Alien cruisers collided with each other in the chaos. Entire squadrons burned without ever seeing their enemy. Humanity had become the storm they feared. And this was only the beginning. On the Terran flagship, the captain finally spoke in a calm, cold tone. This is Strike Wave 1. Initiate Phase 2. Operators typed in silence, and the second wave of war unfolded. Dozens of Terran warships emerged from behind asteroids, dust clouds, hidden black stations, their engines flaring for the first time. But only for seconds, fast enough to move, quiet enough to disappear again. Missiles streaked across the blackness, each one finding a heart of a ship that thought it was safe. Alien alarms screamed louder. Alien admirals shouted orders no one could follow. And the galaxy witnessed the first time a council fleet vanished in the dark without leaving even wreckage. Just floating ash and silence, the Terran fleet didn't roar, it didn't gloat. It simply moved on to the next target, calm as death itself. For this was not just a battle. This was a message. The silence they had laughed at was the sound of their doom. That on Earth the sky was still dark when the message spread across every screen, every street, every city, a single sentence glowing in blood-red letters. They went too far. The quiet hum of the world turned into a deep pulse like a heartbeat growing louder with every second. People gathered in silence watching the message on rooftops, in cafes, in transport stations. No music, no noise, just breathless waiting across the old Terran Defense Command. Thousands of officers and soldiers filled the war rooms, their faces cold and focused. This wasn't panic, this was awakening. Operation Emberfall, a word buried deep in old war books, was lit up again on massive holographic tables. Admirals from across the human colonies appeared on secure feeds, their voices low, their eyes burning not with fear, but with something older, something sharper, fury that had been waiting too long to be unleashed. The order was short, not dressed in speeches, not dressed in politics, just one phrase from high command: bring them home in pieces. Beneath the oceans, deep under mountains, inside stations carved into asteroids, Terran war machines came alive. Hidden hangars opened like the jaws of giants. Railguns the size of towers slid into position. Stealth cruisers long forgotten since the last great war powered up with silent engines and cold fury. The Terran fleet had been built not to display power but to keep it sleeping until the right moment, and that moment had arrived. Entire cities lit their power grids for the fleet. Factories shifted from civil to war production in seconds. Screens across Earth displayed only the black Terran flag with a single star burning bright. The people didn't cheer, they didn't need to, because they all understood that the silence of humanity was ending. Out in the void, thousands of Terran ships began to move like shadows, crawling out of hiding, their black hulls swallowing every light around them. The alien fleets that had mocked human borders only hours earlier now faced the awakening of an entire civilization that had never truly been at peace. Human fleets formed in perfect silence like predators encircling prey. Their formation stretched across the stars, thousands of warships, frigates, destroyers, dreadnoughts, carriers, and black steel monsters. Built in the cold years when humanity trusted no one, their engines lit up at the same moment like stars being born, but unlike stars, these burned with vengeance. On the command deck of the Terran flagship, the captain stood under dim red light as the operation timer hit 0. His crew didn't need orders, they had trained for this moment their entire lives. All units, he said quietly, execute. And the black fleet moved as one massive organism. Stealth cannons rotated into position, missile tubes hissed to life, railgun coils heated up like glowing veins running through steel bodies in orbit over Mars. Old defense platforms reactivated after decades in silence, their targeting systems locking on alien ships that had crossed the line while alien commanders drank and laughed. Humanity had surrounded them with the patience of wolves. Across alien news networks, laughter turned into panic. The once calm council reports were now filled with broken signals, desperate voices screaming of entire fleets vanishing, of radar screens turning black. No one had expected humans to move this fast, to respond with such precision. In the council chamber, delegates shouted over each other, demanding answers. The same arrogance that burned bright hours ago now cracked under the sound of a war they could no longer control. One delegate whispered in fear they were waiting for this, and he was right. In orbit over Earth, the skies burned with the launch of wave after wave of Terran warships leaving the cradle of humanity for war. People on the ground stood in silence, watching dark streaks of steel rise into the heavens. Mothers held their children, soldiers tightened their fists, engineers smiled faintly. This wasn't just about defense anymore, this was humanity answering a challenge that should never have been made. The council thought they were dealing with diplomats, but they were about to face the oldest part of humanity, the part that survived every empire, every war, every extinction event. Deep inside the alien fleet, the mood shifted fast. What had once been mocking confidence now smelled like fear. Alien admirals stared at their maps, watching Terran signals appearing from every direction. They tried to call reinforcements, but communications cracked with interference. They tried to retreat, but every escape route was already blocked. They had surrounded humanity, but now it was humanity surrounding them. One alien commander shouted, "Where did these ships come from?" But no one could answer, because the truth was terrifying. These ships had always been their hidden silent patient, waiting for the council to make the first mistake. The first full-scale Terran assault began without a single warning. Missile streaks cut through the darkness like silver lightning. Railgun shells roared through vacuum, shaking entire fleets. In seconds, the alien lines shattered like fragile glass, their shields built for slow wars, not for this kind of precision rage. Their carriers exploded in massive waves of blue fire. Their fighters were swatted out of space before they even deployed. The Terran fleet moved like it had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, because it had. Inside the council chamber, the high speaker, who had once laughed with pride, now sat frozen, watching the real-time battle feed their proud fleets turning to dust within minutes. One delegate whispered, "They're not defending. They're hunting," and that was the truth. Humanity was not reacting, they were delivering judgment, cold and quiet and final. While alien admirals screamed into their comms, the Terran fleet kept moving like a shadow tide, unstoppable, unforgiving. On the flagship bridge, the captain looked out into the sea of burning alien ships. The reflection of fire danced in his eyes. There was no smile on his face, no celebration, only cold purpose. Phase 3. He whispered, and across the fleet human warships adjusted their course deeper into Council territory. The galaxy would remember this night not for the battles won by words but for the silence that came before the storm and the fire that followed. The council chamber that once shook with power now trembled with fear. The golden walls that had reflected arrogance just hours before now reflected the pale faces of alien delegates staring at screens that burned red with disaster. One by one reports flooded in, entire fleets gone, communications lost, border defenses crumbling, worlds falling silent. The high speaker slammed his hand on the table demanding control, but control was already gone. Their command lines were broken, their fleets scattered. Their confidence turned to ash. The same voices that mocked humanity were now shouting over each other, desperate, angry, terrified. "This is impossible," one delegate screamed. They were weak, they were silent, they were nothing. But the truth had already landed on their golden floor. Silence was never weakness, silence had been the warning. In every corner of the council capital, panic spread like fire through dry grass. Military commanders ran through marble halls, their ornate uniforms stained with sweat. Comms officers shouted conflicting messages. War maps flickered as systems overloaded. Nothing was stable, nothing made sense. They couldn't see where the Terran fleet was coming from because it was coming from everywhere. Black ships with no transponder signals were appearing inside their own space, hitting trade hubs, military outposts, and border gates simultaneously. It was as if humanity had studied every crack in the Council's armor for years and now was pushing on all of them at once. Their leaders stared at the burning red holograms, unable to accept the reality that they were not the hunters anymore, they were prey. In a small chamber away from the shouting, a group of alien intelligence officers huddled around a dark screen watching a map of the galactic core blinking with red dots. Terran strike fleets were moving in perfect silence, taking down communication relays, disabling sensor arrays, knocking out supply chains before the Council could even mobilize. "They're dismantling the spine," one officer whispered, his voice shaking. "They know exactly where to hit." And they did, because humanity had watched them for decades. The Council had looked down at Earth and seen a primitive, stubborn world, but Earth had looked back and memorized everything, every weak line, every lazy defense, every blind corner. Now all of it was being cut open like an old wound. Alien delegates tried to call for reinforcements, but the fleets they once trusted had gone silent. Some had been destroyed without a single distress call. Others refused to answer because fear was spreading faster than any order. Admirals in distant sectors began to pull back their ships, not out of loyalty but out of survival. They had mocked humanity, but now they understood the old stories told in dark corners about humans when pushed too far. The kind of war they brought was not glorious, it was cold, surgical, and endless. The high speaker leaned back in his chair, his hands trembling, his mind replaying the moment humanity had walked out of the chamber in silence. That silence now echoed louder than any scream. Across the Council capital cities, panic reached the streets. Civilians who once believed the Council untouchable now saw burning ships falling through the sky as Terran strike teams hit orbital platforms. Precision raids crippled defense grids like knives through paper. People ran through glowing streets looking up at the black Terran ships moving above them like shadows swallowing stars. Entire towers of their defense ministry went dark as human infiltrators triggered silent overrides. Decades of arrogance had made the Council slow and comfortable, and now that comfort was killing them. Inside the emergency war room, alien generals argued about strategy. Some demanded peace, others called for counterattack, but none could agree because deep inside they all felt the same truth. It was already too late. This wasn't a war they could turn around. This was an avalanche that had already buried them. The Council leader finally shouted for silence, his voice cracking. "Send a message to Earth. We will negotiate. We will offer them the border. We will give them anything but the communication." Officer shook his head. No response. The humans weren't interested in talking anymore. They weren't punishing, they were dismantling. Far away from the Council core, the Terran fleet moved like a black tide. Every world that once flew the Council banner now saw Terran shadows above them. The humans didn't bomb cities, they didn't destroy planets, they took control with terrifying efficiency, disabling command centers, locking down orbital stations, cutting power to fleets before they even fired back. It wasn't rage, it was precision, the kind of precision only earned through decades of waiting. One alien admiral tried to regroup his ships, but the moment they powered up, Terran missiles cut through their formation like a blade through silk. Nothing was left but floating wrecks. Back in the Council chamber, the high speaker stared at the burning red map, realizing everything they had built was crumbling faster than they could speak. "They don't want territory," he whispered, his voice breaking. "They want us to remember." And he was right. Humanity wasn't just fighting for land or resources, they were sending a message to the entire galaxy. No one crosses the line and walks away from it unscathed. The alien delegates who once laughed at human pride now sat in silence, their claws shaking their throats, dry fear crawling through their bones as they heard the words from a terrified officer. "The Terran fleet is moving toward the capital system. Every siren in the council capital began to scream the same scream they had forced upon others for centuries. The hunters who once ruled the stars were now trapped in their own golden cage, and in the black void beyond their defenses humanity was coming not as diplomats, not as allies, not even as soldiers, but as a storm made of quiet rage and unbreakable will. The council had gone too far, and now they would learn what it meant to awaken the fury of an entire species. The humans reached the capital system faster than any alien commander thought possible. The Council's golden core was supposed to be untouchable, surrounded by dozens of defense rings, hundreds of fleets, and countless automated platforms built over centuries of arrogance, but all that power meant nothing when the enemy was already inside their walls. The moment the Terran fleet arrived, the stars around the capital darkened like a curtain being pulled over the galaxy. Ships emerged from the void without warning, no hyperspace trail, no signature, no time to respond. They came like a wave of black steel, moving in silence. The alien defense platforms blinked to life and tried to target them, but by the time their sensors caught the first signals, the Terran warships were already too close. Railguns thundered through the void like silent gods speaking in fire, and light defense lines that had never been tested against real war crumbled like old glass. The alien admirals screamed into their comms, their perfectly drilled defense fleets spinning in chaos. They were trained to fight slow wars, predictable wars against pirates and border rebels, not against predators that had been planning this for decades. The first Terran strike groups sliced through their outer lines in seconds. Missile clouds blotted out the stars, while railguns tore through cruiser armor like paper. Alien ships tried to retreat, but retreat was no longer possible. Every route out was already cut. Terran stealth fleets had positioned themselves days earlier like hunters setting traps around a wounded animal. The council capital that had once shined like a symbol of strength now burned in the darkness, surrounded on all sides. Inside the golden chamber, the high speaker stared at the burning red holograms with empty eyes. Every defense ring was flashing critical. Their proud fleets were vanishing from the map faster than anyone could report it. Delegates shouted orders that meant nothing. Some begged to open negotiations, some screamed for the fleets to fight, but none of it mattered. The humans weren't answering messages, they weren't broadcasting anything, they were silent, and in that silence the council finally understood. What they had mocked for so long, silence wasn't weakness, silence was the sound of the knife sliding in. Alien fighter wings launched from orbit in desperation, hoping to stop the Terran wave, but their comms filled with static before they could even lock on targets. Human ECM ships cloaked in the black void jammed every signal, every frequency, every hope. The alien pilots never saw what hit them, only flashes of burning light as Terran interceptors fell on them like shadows with teeth. Above the capital world, a single Terran dreadnought cut straight through an entire defense squadron without slowing down its railguns, slicing ships in half before they could even turn. Shields meant to hold for hours cracked in seconds. One alien commander whispered in disbelief, "This can't be real." But it was real, very real, and it was far from over. On the surface of the capital world, alarms wailed across the glowing skyline. The same towers that once cast their shadow over lesser worlds now shook as Terran orbital strikes hit defense grids with surgical precision. They didn't bomb cities, they didn't burn civilians, they shut down everything that made the capital powerful: energy grids, communications, orbital control nodes. One by one they fell like dominoes. Civilians ran through the streets, staring up at the dark sky where black Terran ships floated like wolves above a cornered herd. Their arrival wasn't loud, it was heavy, a silence that pressed down on every chest like a weight. The Council's elite guard tried to activate their last defense system, a massive shield meant to protect the golden chamber itself, but the moment the system came online, a Terran code long buried deep inside their own network activated and shut it down. The aliens froze as they realized humans had been inside their systems long before the war even began. They had trusted their golden walls too much, they had grown blind behind their power. One delegate whispered, "They planned this years ago." Another answered, "No, they waited for us to give them a reason." The Terran fleet advanced closer to orbit, dreadnoughts positioning over key zones, destroyers blocking every escape path, carriers opening their bays with quiet precision. Terran dropships launched in black streaks, cutting through the atmosphere like knives through silk. The Council guards rushed to seal the great golden doors, but the sound of Terran boots echoed long before the metal-locked. Terran Marines in black armor stormed the outer halls, moving with perfect rhythm, their visors glowing red, their rifles raised. There was no shouting, no hesitation. Every move was clean and precise. They had trained for this exact place, this exact moment for years. The alien guards fired first and died first. The Terran Marines didn't miss. They advanced like shadows, swallowing light. The great golden hall that once hosted laughter and mockery of humanity now echoed with the sound of boots on marble. The delegates inside the chamber backed away, trembling. The high speaker tried to shout orders, but his voice cracked into silence as the massive door shook under the impact of Terran breaching charges. Each thud was like the heartbeat of the end. And when the final charge detonated, the golden doors exploded inward. A wave of black armor and red visors stormed inside like a storm. The air itself seemed to freeze. The same council delegates who once called humanity weak now watched their greatest fortress fall in minutes, their fleets destroyed, their defenses useless, their walls broken, their power shattered. Before their eyes they realized too late that they were never fighting soldiers, they were facing an entire species that had been pushed past the line. Humans didn't come to ask, they came to end, and no one in that chamber doubted it anymore. The Terran captain stepped forward, his boots echoing on the marble floor, his rifle lowered but his eyes cold behind the black visor. He didn't speak a single word because he didn't need to. The silence said everything. The council's age of power had ended. The last broadcast of the war wasn't a speech, it wasn't a demand, and it wasn't a threat. It was a single image beamed across every world, every fleet, every station that once kneeled before the council. It showed the great golden chamber shattered, the proud banner of the council ripped from its pole lying in the rubble, and above it the black Terran flag with its single star rising in silence. No one spoke when they saw it because they understood what it meant. The era of the council had ended, not with a treaty, not with negotiation, but with the quiet fury of a species that had been pushed too far. The galaxy that once called Earth dangerous now trembled under the weight of its silence. Outside the capital world, the council's last fleets floated as broken skeletons drifting through the black void. Some ships tried to flee, but the Terran fleet did not chase them. They didn't have to. The message had already been delivered. Retreating fleets carried the fear home like a plague. Every admiral, every soldier who survived would tell the same story. They didn't see fire first, they saw nothing, just silence, and then death came from the dark like a storm that had been waiting for centuries to be born. The humans didn't cheer, they didn't scream, they didn't wave their victory in the air. They simply stood in their black ships and watched the stars as if to remind the galaxy this was never about glory, this was about the line they crossed. Inside the broken council chamber, delegates sat in the ruins of their own arrogance. The golden ceiling was cracked, the lights flickered, the air filled with the metallic smell of smoke and silence. Terran Marines stood around the room, their armor dark and still like statues. They didn't need to point their weapons anymore. Everyone inside understood who held power now. The High Speaker, who once raised his arms in arrogance, now knelt on the cold floor, his voice shaking as he whispered, "We surrender." But the Terran captain didn't reply, he just stared down at him through the black visor because humanity didn't need their words, their surrender was already written in the ashes around them. Across the galaxy, alien worlds watched in quiet fear. They had seen the council bully humanity for decades, mocking their silence, calling it weakness. They had watched as the vote was cast against Earth, thinking nothing would come of it. They had believed the stories the council told them about fragile humans, stubborn humans, isolated humans, but what they saw now was not fragility, it was a storm made of patience and precision. It wasn't the loud kind of rage that burns out fast, it was the cold kind that waited silently until it was unstoppable. In Terran space, the Black Fleet hung in the void like a wall around Earth, every ship returning to formation without a single victory chant. Officers stood at their stations, their faces calm, but their eyes burning with the kind of fire that doesn't fade. They had not fought for conquest, they had fought to remind the galaxy that humanity was not to be crossed again. In underground war rooms, the generals didn't celebrate, they looked at star maps with quiet calculation. Because they knew this war had changed everything. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. On alien worlds where council soldiers had once marched, banners began to fall without a fight. Entire systems surrendered before Terran fleets even arrived. They knew resistance meant nothing now because this wasn't just about weapons, it was about fear, the fear of what happens when a quiet species finally decides to roar. The once powerful council colonies now sent their envoys not with threats but with trembling hands and bowed heads. The council's old allies spoke soft words about peace, about rebuilding, about respect, but the humans didn't respond right away. They let the silence answer for them because the silence had always been their sharpest blade. The galaxy slowly began to shift its shape. The council's web of power unraveled in weeks. Something that had taken centuries to build fell like sand through fingers. Planets that had been controlled by force now looked to Earth with a strange mix of fear and respect because humanity had proven a truth that echoed across the stars. They may be silent, but they were never weak. They may look small, but their fury was boundless. At the center of the ruined chamber, the Terran captain finally raised his hand. The black flag above the rubble rippled in the stale air. He didn't deliver a speech, he didn't demand tribute, he simply turned away because victory was never the goal, it was a warning, a promise carved into the stars. The council went too far and paid the price. In the black sky above the capital, the Terran fleet began to leave in perfect silence, their engines glowing faint red as they slipped into the void once more. Not conquerors, not tyrants, but a storm returning to sleep, waiting, watching, reminding everyone who saw them that crossing the line with humanity was not something the galaxy could survive twice. No monuments were built, no songs were sung, but every star remembered the night the council's golden world fell and the silence of humanity became the loudest sound in the galaxy.